Are you, like most people, still waiting for your faction's 9th edition Codex? Let's talk about Games Workshop's Army Book release schedule. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for a more discussion related video. This one kind of related to the one that I made last week about the Codexes in 9th edition and why for the most part I quite like the way that they're working. Feel free to go and watch that one if you haven't already. But in general, the gist was I quite like the way that the codexes are internally balanced. They seem quite fun and flavourful in rules, fix a bunch of issues in 8th edition, though there are certainly some downsides, including disparity of unit power, and maybe adding a bit of bloat to the game. Perhaps the most common comment that I got on that video is yes, 9th edition codexes are great if you have one, but I wish they'd hurry up and actually release them, and I'm still waiting for the one for my army. There's really quite a lot of people who would like Games Workshop to speed up a bit on the releasing front. I think there's a few main reasons that people really want their 9th edition codexes, and one motivation seems to be the power creep that Games Workshop likes to keep on steadily rolling. Typically, they generally want their newer codexes to just be that bit bigger, better and more exciting, so they often tend to be slightly on the stronger scale of the spectrum, and every so often they release ones that are really quite powerful indeed. Particularly the Dark Angels and Death Guard ones are real standouts for this. Maybe Drukhari might be joining them, we'll have to wait and see. The design philosophy of 9th edition, at least in part, seems to have been to make all the units that little bit more expensive, so there are less of them to field on the table, and when their codex comes out, some units get points drops, some units get boosted gear. There are certainly exceptions to the rule, but it means that some of the oldest codexes will often struggle to beat the newest of the new. Say for example, I wouldn't feel too confident playing as say pure Craftworld Eldar, Genestealer Cults, Tau or Thousand Sons, and going up against one of the beasts of the new meta, such as Dark Angels, Death Guard or Drukhari. A lot of the older codexes just don't work incredibly well for the new 9th edition missions. Tau in particular just don't seem to work very well as a faction now. They either need better and more solid units to take the midfield early, or just even more firepower so they can actually try and table opponents by the end of a 5-turn game. Craftworlds also struggle with durable units to take the midfield, and Thousand Sons just don't work very well being able to flesh out an entire battle line, though they do have some powerful tricks to contribute to a Chaos Soup army. In particular, some factions are also really waiting on promised changes that they know are coming, such as Chaos Space Marines getting extra wounds on their Terminators and Standard Marines, and similar for Thousand Sons and Grey Knights. I think what really has driven this sentiment up just a bit though, is that Games Workshop have started to release campaign expansions to 9th edition already, when we don't have most of the codexes out. I don't really know enough about Games Workshop's release schedule to know whether the Charadon books are actually driving back the codex schedule, or whether they're just an extra edition on top. In any case though, a lot of people aren't the biggest fans of seeing random extra supplemental rules, instead of Games Workshop releasing all the codexes to make sure there's a level playing field. So there's absolutely certainly some reasons to want the codexes to speed up a bit, but I thought it would be interesting to see the codex release schedule as compared with 8th edition and the previous editions before that. I feel like coming out of 8th edition, it really set people's expectations as to what to expect, though it was kind of an unprecedented time within Games Workshop. No army had a codex then, they only had the original indexes that came out at the very start of 8th edition, so Games Workshop was absolutely full power pedal to the metal, releasing every codex as quick as possible. And over the first major release cycle of the codexes over the first 2 years, and we've got 30 codexes leading to 15 per year. Sorry, not 13 as I seem to have written there. That does include supplement codexes like Ultramarines, but not the campaign books like Vigilus. This really was kind of unprecedented though. Games Workshop never used to release codexes anywhere near as fast as this before that. I will say though that I do quite like it. I like the precedent of every faction having an update of their rules within an edition, and I'm glad Games Workshop seem to be going this way. Previously, say in 5th, 6th or 7th, you couldn't actually be guaranteed that your faction would actually receive an updated codex. I certainly remember Sisters of Battle and Dark Eldar having monumental amounts of time to wait in between proper codex updates. I think 8th edition was a big step in the right direction. For previous editions though, things were much slower. In 7th edition there were around 18 codexes in 3 years, so around 6 per year. There were a few campaign books on top of that to give certain factions fortifications and things, but not every faction even got that, such as Tyranids. In 6th edition there were 13 codexes in 2 years, so a little bit more, 6.5 per year. But in 5th edition before that, there were just the 9 codexes in 3 years I believe, only 3 per year. Jumping all the way up to more than 1 a month in the first couple of years of 8th really is quite impressive. In 9th edition we're not actually doing terribly badly either. So far we've had 8 codexes and 1 campaign books in the first 9 months. That's equate to around about 11 per year so far, and we should be getting the Admech Codex very soon on top of that. I think perhaps what makes the release schedule feel a bit slower is the order that they've been released in. Codex Space Marines and the 4 more Divergent Space Marines have all been released already. Deathwatch, Blood Angels, Space Wolves and Dark Angels, all of which rebranded as supplements to Codex Space Marines when they had a full standalone codex in 8th. I think it certainly does add to the feeling that less armies have been released, just because 5 of them, despite being their individual standalone factions in the previous edition, are kind of different colours of power armour. Overall though, it's not significantly behind 8th edition at the moment, 15 per year over the first 2 years there, and 11 or 12 per year at the moment. Still though, why does Games Workshop move at a fairly steady pace as opposed to releasing all the codexes right at the start of the edition? Firstly, as they're a company that wants to make profit and keep on selling models to us in the future, I think there's unquestionably a bit of a sales element to it. Hobbyists only have so much hobby energy and disposable income at any one time. If they just overloaded us by dropping 26 codexes all in the same month, I think it's far less likely that people would jump at the chance to buy 3 or 4 of them. I think the same works for virtually any company that wants to sell anything, to be honest. You don't really want to just create an enormous glut in the market, and I think it's far easier to convince people to pick up each new codex in succession for each of their armies if there's a decent gap in between them. Say you have a player who collects Sisters of Battle and Necrons, you might be able to sell them some Necron models when their codex drops, and then 6 months down the line you might be able to sell them some more models and a new book when the Sisters of Battle codex drops as well. I think that not having content overload and then drought is also good for us as the hobbyists as well, as it keeps the game fresh and constantly evolving at a slow and steady rate. If all the rules were released all in one big go, then we'd all be very confused for a little bit and trying to work out what sort of things are best. But once people did get to know exactly what things they wanted to run in 40k, then everything will get quite stagnant. I just feel like it's a lot harder to get excited by an essentially a solved puzzle. And with some new and interesting content for the game each month, it means that you might always have to be slightly adjusting your tactics and thinking about how to face up to these new threats. Generally, I think that that's good for us as players. If they just released everything all in one go, then I feel like interest would peak, and without the new changes and interest that new releases add to the game, people wouldn't be quite as interested for the majority of the rest of the year. Finally, quite apart from any conscious effort on Games Workshop's part, I think this year has given us some special challenges, which is why the Codex release schedule has been bumped back a bit. Certainly the virus will have disrupted their supply chains, and quite possibly Brexit on top of that. They're certainly running behind their own intended release schedule, as they meant for the Death Guard to be coming out in December, and then Dark Angels and Drukhari both for January. Of course that certainly didn't happen. Dark Angels dropped in February, and Drukhari in March. It does seem that if they'd been running to their own intended schedule, that we would have seen a pretty much exact similar release to the Codex pattern in 8th edition, which was very fast. So overall, I'd say that Codexes aren't releasing particularly slowly right now, and quite a big chunk of the reason why they are going slower than 8th edition is beyond Games Workshop's control. However, I think there are a few things that they could potentially do to try and make it easier on people while they wait. Potentially a bit more of a Codex roadmap could help a bit. They gave us that one at the end of last year, though I guess perhaps they're a little bit wary of doing that, as of course, as we can see, Death Guard didn't come out in December, and that Dark Angels and Drukhari one that they said didn't come out in January. It could be pretty handy for planning purchases, though we might lose out a bit of the excitement or suspense, and to be honest we can make some educated guesses as to what's coming next. We do know that there's a ton of models on the way for Orcs and Sisters, so it seems reasonable that they're going to be very close. There also isn't a real reason why not having a 9th edition codex would necessarily make an army weaker than another. Armies like Sisters, Harlequins, Demons and Custodies all seem to be doing pretty well at the moment, and Games Workshop does do balance passes where they reissue the points, so if certain armies are struggling, they could just drastically reduce the points to a fair few units in the faction. Sure, say Tower one of the weaker armies than the competitive game right now, but they'd certainly be doing better if Games Workshop just shaves 10% off the points of every unit in the codex. If Games Workshop really wanted to, they could absolutely turn balance on its head at any point with these balance pass updates. We did already have a Wargear FAQ that updated the profiles for things like melter weapons, flamers and other bits. Potentially another stopgap FAQ or two might be handy for certain armies, such as Grey Knights, Thousand Sons and Chaos Marines. They really want the extra wounds on their core profiles. I can see why this might be a bit more of a faff to implement for Games Workshop than the Wargear one, but I suspect a lot of people who play those armies will be willing to put up with a fairly hefty FAQ document if it put them on the same level as the other Space Marine armies. Otherwise, I guess it is just waiting for the codexes and getting the buffs when they come out, though I do suspect that things will start to speed up a bit as the virus starts to die down a bit in many parts of the world. Finally, this might not really help now, but I would bear in mind that if your codex isn't one that's come out yet, then the codexes that release later in the release schedule do tend to be a bit stronger than the ones that came out right at the start. This happens in almost every edition in 40k, largely it's due to Games Workshop's power creep, but maybe partly also due to having more factions with decent new codexes to compare to, and Games Workshop wanting to make them comparable, if not slightly better. It means that when codexes do drop, it might mean that you might well be glad that you got one right at the end of the schedule, rather than getting an early one. For all we know, Codex Space Marines and Necrons might not be looking all that strong at the end of the edition. So as always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Would you like Games Workshop to release codexes faster, or is this a fairly acceptable rate at the moment? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the strategy and tactics videos for 40k coming alongside a fair few discussion pieces like this. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel, I would just like to mention the channel's Element Games affiliate link, which you can find down in the video description below. If you live in the UK, Element Games is an excellent discount retailer who sell Warhammer 40k models a bit cheaper, usually at 10 to 20% off. If you were thinking about ordering in some models anyway, feel free to click on the link down in the video description, and if you do that and buy something, a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics, and it doesn't cost you any more whatsoever on the purchase. Can just be a way to help out if you were thinking about buying some models anyway. If you're in the USA or Canada, I do have a very similar Amazon link down in the same video description. That one works basically the exact same way. Click the link, buy anything else that you were going to anyway, and a small amount will help support the channel. In any case, a very big thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.